Well, welcome. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Linda Starwolf. And we're going to talk about your latest book, which is called Aquarian Shaman. And I think we might as well start from a very basic ground level, because many people have heard the word shaman, but many of those people may really not know what it means. So why don't you begin by explaining what a shaman is from your point of view?
I think that, first of all, thank you for having me on today, Richard. I'm happy to be here. And I think that a lot of people have a lot of ideas about what shaman is. So I'm not going to think that I'm the authority on to say what a shaman is, but I'm going to share with you my understanding of it. And for me, a shaman or a shamaness, because it comes in all flavors, 50 shades of gender, that the shaman is someone who is a walker between the worlds. And when most people think of a shaman, they might think of Siberia for some of the original, the word shaman or shaman or shaman, where it started from, and where the word actually was translated into excited energy, a person who has excited energy, which could be almost anyone really. But traditionally, a shaman was someone who was a medicine person, a medicine man, woman, or even transgender. They were medicine people, meaning that they carried some excited energy or high frequency energy. They had different tools that they used, but they were channeling and working with an energy with the elemental world and also from within themselves that they had developed. And they had often been injured or sick themselves beforehand. And in their own recovery and healing, they learned how to work with healing spirits, energies, whatever words you want to overlay on that. But what we know is that it worked, that they were able to heal people of terminal illnesses, of mental maladies, all kinds of things. And in some places, they were even said, this is sketchy, I guess, at some level, but to raise the dead, that they brought people back from the other world. So it's something that I've long been interested in, really, since I was very young, and for my own reasons, personal reasons. And it's a path that has called me to it.
Well, that's very good. Thank you. Very helpful explanation. Well, in a sense, we've covered one half of your book title. So let's cover the other half. It's Aquarian Shaman. So it obviously has to do with the age of Aquarius, which just about everybody has heard of, but may understand even less well than they understand the word shaman. So what do you mean when you're talking about Aquarian and the age of Aquarius?
About 40 years ago, I started working with medicine teachers. I had already been personally a therapist and counselor. I went to school to become a social worker and an addiction specialist from some of my own personal background, and went to the University of Kentucky and those kind of things. So I was already kind of a healer in that way, if you will, working in those fields. And I got in touch with different studies and things. I wanted to go back to healing. And when I got back to the healing at its deepest roots, what I found was esoteric teachers and shamans. And it was during this time, during the 1980s, if you will, late 70s, early 80s, of course, when the song came out, The Age of Aquarius, when people were marching in the streets. We were marching in the streets in the University of Kentucky. There was all kinds of things going on. And we really were the hippies of that era. And, a lot of people said we were the children of, we were the child or the teenagers of Aquarius energy. And as I went on in my life, I began to think back on that time and what was going on at that time, and asking if that's what the children of Aquarius looks like, what does the adults Aquarians look like? And so for me, I know that if I cut my arm, it starts to heal itself naturally. And I believe that human beings have the ability to become grown-ups of God instead of children of God. Okay, I think that God, or Goddess, however you want to look at it, is tired of us being children and would really like it if we would no longer be children or adolescents, and if we would grow up and be adults of God. God is whatever, all that is of the universe. And what would it look like if human beings really grew up and took their place like like the redwoods have, and like the oceans have, and the mountains have, and the deserts, like the elemental world and all the creatures? What if we grew up into our own nobility? What if we grew up into our own higher levels of consciousness? And I started seeking for a word around that, and what came to me is the song Aquarius. Harmony, peace, and understanding, and goodwill, and walking in a certain ways, with visions at a higher level of consciousness. And I was already very involved with the shamanic world and the healing world. Like I said, I have worked in mental health. I've worked with chronic, as they call chronic mentally ill. I worked with addiction, my own and others, all kinds of things. So for me, I started looking at, instead of, giving people the title of an illness, what if we said that the people who are going through these radical shifts and who learn how to heal and recover and then to help other people, is we called them something else. And to me, it just popped into my mind really during meditation that these were the children that had grown up as Aquarians. And that these Aquarians were the modern day, if you will, healers, teachers, philosophers, way showers, that these people, who largely would probably say, especially, 50s on, were the ones who were the modern day shamans. We were the Aquarian shamans. And it's not like to be a fancy title. Some people see it that way. But I think it's an evolution that our higher power is looking to us now and saying, I've given you the Garden of Eden. I've given you the keys to the kingdom, to the queendom. Is it safe to let you drive the car? Be home after 10, that sort of thing. And so it's really hit a nerve with people in a good way of beginning to say, if I'm an Aquarian shaman, what is my gift? What have I learned how to heal? And how can I transmit and offer that gift to the world? So I know that's a lengthy answer to your question, but this is a big evolution for me in having been on a healing path personally, and also always having that been my profession since I was 20 years old. So, and I'm 72 now. So this is 50 years that I've been on this path and evolving this. And I love it that at a time when I thought maybe I would wind down some, I feel like I'm just getting started again because so many people are vibing to this frequency.
Fascinating. Well, my own personal theory, which I will not explain in any great detail now, is that the watershed between the Piscean and Aquarian ages was the World Wars. And this would jibe with what you're saying, because that generation was beginning to be born during the war and into the baby boom generation and so on. So that makes sense. And we all know the song from Hair, which you alluded to, harmony and understanding. The question I have is that it seems to me that we are definitely in a different age, that we are in the age of Aquarius. I don't have a question about that, but it's not quite the harmony and love and understanding hippie paradise that somehow we were expecting. So could you comment on that?
I wish I didn't have to, but I'm not going to go into some of the thoughts I have right now. They would just be probably X-rated at this moment. But what I will say is that being a woman and having given birth to children, I know that the hardest part of birth is about 1 minute before that baby is born. I like to tell the story of my daughter-in-law, with my first grandchild. It was actually the second grandchild. I was there for both of them to be born, and they were born in the hospital, but I was there. And on the second child, as he was being born, she was having such a hard time. I turned my back, and she got up and got out of bed and said, I said, "What are you doing, Shelley?" She said, "I'm going home." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I'm not doing this." I'm like, "What do you mean? You're minutes away." She said, I can't do it." And I said, "Yes, you can." And she's like, you don't know." And I'm like, "Honey, who do you think you're married to?" Anyway. But the point is, for me, I will never forget that moment right before birth, when birth is imminent, is when the pain is the most difficult. It's off the Richter scale. And working in the field of addictions, I've never seen somebody because they got their first ticket get sober or because they had a hangover. They've often been in jail. They've often lost their family. They may be losing their health. They may be forced into treatment. All kinds of things. They've had heartbreak. Sometimes they're living on the streets. All these kinds of things, whether they've been a Park Avenue attorney or whether they've been a hillbilly in the mountains of Kentucky where I grew up, they hit a bottom and it's bad. And so it's at that moment of exquisite pain where you cannot take it anymore that your old self says, "I'm willing to die." Now, I grew up in the Baptist church, so I know what it means that 1 minute before you're a lost sinner, which I don't really go along with all that, but you know what I'm saying. I understand it at a metaphysical level, that there's a way in which you're disconnected, even if you have a philosophical idea, that emotionally and spiritually there's a gap between you and the great mystery and God, Goddess, whatever you want to call it. And in that moment where there's an awakening, where you have to say help to something outside of ourselves, bigger than ourselves, that then all of a sudden we have the power. We receive the power, the transmission. Some people call it the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost, helping guides and shamanism, spirit guides, helpers, animal powers, ancestors, whatever it might be. Whatever you call on something. They always say in the philosophy that I study that called or uncalled, God will come when we need her or him or it. So it's in that moment of our greatest doubt, loss, brokenness that we break open, that something can come into us. We're possessed. We're possessed by enthusiasm to be inspirited. We're possessed by something bigger than our little human ego consciousness, and we become more evolved ourselves. To me, that's really where I feel that this pain and suffering that's going on, the fears, the doubts, and I will say that a lot of people yesterday politically were talking about hope. And I posted a poem that said, "I wait without hope, for hope would be hope of the wrong thing," which is not original. That is a poem by T.S. Eliot, I think. But anyway, to hope would be hope for the wrong thing. Because we often hope for the pain to hurry up and be over. And sometimes it has not been enough pain yet for something new to be born. And that's the way, it seems like that's the cosmic laws on this planet. My Wolf Clan grandmother, Twyla Nitch, the Seneca Nation, said, "Don't ask me why we made it this way or why we decided to come here to this planet. They do it different in other galaxies. But for some reason, this is a coveted place for souls to come to, because the deeper you can go, or the strongest bottom you can hit, you can do the other opposite of that, to know the opposites clearly and to see their purpose for transformation."
Yeah, that quote you had, what is it? Vocatus atque non vocatus Deus aderit, which was Jung inscribed over the entry to his tower. Called or uncalled,
Yes.
God will be there. or
Yes.
the God will be there, or whatever you like. So yeah, that's certainly very true, and as I say, very profound. In a way, a lot of what you've said in your last response sounds very much like shamanic initiation, and I mean, it sounds like you're almost describing shamanic initiation. Uh, so maybe you could go into a bit more detail about shamanic initiation.
You're absolutely right about that, Richard. And having worked with different native elders, and been in Africa, worked with in Egypt, in Peru, here in the United States, and having been adopted by Seneca Wolf Clan grandmother, and also was very drawn to the Lakota teachings, those sort of things. In fact, today, a brother who's a native elder is playing a recording of my shamanic breathwork for his gathering of people online somewhere around the world. And so I have been called to the shamanic path for a long time, even before I even really knew what it was completely. I think ever since childhood, the elemental world has really called to me. And that what you said about called or uncalled, God comes just the same, has long been a prayer in my heart, that may I have the good sense to call upon what's greater than me, and surrender more quickly. May I have less tolerance towards pain and suffering. May I choose to go, ouch, okay, I'm ready to change, instead of being drug across the coals. And it seems that human beings kind of have this, I don't even know if I'm really answering your question, but it seems to me that human beings almost have to grow up enough to have some autonomy and develop their wills, because it's the only gift we can give back to the great mystery in God. God has everything else but our will. Everything. It's like, what does God want for Christmas or for Hanukkah or whatever? Your will. And what that means is not for us to be a puppet, but that we become a vessel, and that we become have the Holy Spirit or the shamanic spirit or the quickening, where that other part of our consciousness, the pineal gland, opens up and begins to drop the nectar in, where we begin to get multidimensional, as the shamans do, and we can see the whole story. And suffering begins to decrease the more aware we become, regardless of what we're going through. And like, I know, Richard, you and I and others that are watching this have lived long enough that we have certainly experienced a lot of heartbreak and loss in our lives at this point. And there's a way, not that we get jaded or immune, but there's an acceptance about the process of the cycles of change of life and what birth and death and rebirth looks like. I think anybody over the age of 60 is already a shaman at some level, whether they recognize it or not. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a beautiful time for us to be able to use the archetype or the metaphor of the shaman, that this is a time when we're being asked by the age of Aquarius, by everything that's happening around the world, all the horrible, unjust wars, all the bombs that are being dropped, all the things that are happening, the swings of energy in our political world, all these things that feel so outrageous at times. All of these are wake-up calls for human beings to step up and say, it's not about an oligarchy, it's not about a king or a queen or a president, male or female. It's about people. It's about people. The only way governments can rise and fall really is around people supporting them or not. So this is a time where people are going to get to, I believe, experience extreme consciousness. So in its own way, Aquarius is playing its way out. I wish it would be different. And the poem that I posted, to say that, that wait without hope, for hope would be hope of the wrong thing. Like when my husband was dying of cancer 14 years ago, I prayed that he lived. And I hoped that he would. And that was absolutely appropriate for me. But ultimately, at the end, with his suffering, I prayed for God's will.
Well, yeah, that's very beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to bring up a point because you've mentioned it a couple of times already, and it has to do with it being time to grow up. Uh, you know, childhood's end, as Arthur C. Clarke would put it. But in response to this, I noticed that American mass culture and American adults seem to become more infantilized, more kid-like, you know, down to dress, because sneakers and blue jeans were what kids wore when I was a kid. Now everybody wears them. Uh, Kind of fast food, junk food were basically kid food. I mean, I certainly, my father went to McDonald's for me every Saturday, but my parents didn't eat McDonald's. And now I see all of this fast food, dress, and of course, certain types of personal behavior, making it seem as if we're doing the opposite. I mean, Americans today often seem less mature than they did 50 years ago. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have a mixed reaction to that. Like, on the one hand, I'm like, yes, you know. And then on another, because we do lots and lots of trainings, and a big portion of the people, for instance, we just came back from Costa Rica. We were in Costa Rica for 2 weeks in December, and then we were in Egypt for a couple of weeks in November. And 3/4 of the people that are in those trainings, which is usually between 20 to 40 people with us for 2 whole weeks, and we're living together, and we're together in the morning and session, afternoon and evening. So it's kind of 10 to 10 with breaks in between, intensive shamanic breathwork training, intensive and SHIP programs. And these people are from all around the world. It's not uncommon in our program, when we have a 2-week program for our training, to have 30 people and 15 of them be from other countries and the rest from the US. And of all genders and of all ages. I would say that it's more of a 20 to 40 group, but then we have people in their 60s too, and that sort of thing, coming more for their own healing. But a lot of these people are coming for training because they're coming to learn how to be shamanic breathwork facilitators. And what I notice in the group is that I believe storytelling is one of the best ways to transmit wisdom. The Bible has done that. Religious books all around the world have done that, to tell the story of what has been. And it's kind of like you're handing off the baton to the next generation so they can take that and build on with their lives and what they're learning, right? And what I find is that as much as these people love me and love my books and things like that, and love, want to do the processes and want to be trained, want to be breathwork facilitators, want to be shamanic ministers, they get in I could tell their eyes are glazing over a little bit. There's like almost a little bit of disassociation, and not everybody, but I'm going to say that in general, a little bit after 20 or 30 minutes of my teaching or something, I can see that they're not paying as close attention. It's like the stories are like, I think, ho-hum. And these stories are sacred to me. They're sacred, They are the wisdom teachings that the Jacqueline Smalls, right? And the Stan Groffs of Holotrope, and the Leonard Orr, who was a friend of mine, and Grandmother Twyla, who was the Seneca Wolf Clan grandmother, who was 94 when she passed. And these wisdom teachings, some that are only available through verbal transmission because they didn't write certain things, or that have been written about that are not really being written about except by people like me and probably you guys, anymore, because people want it. They want it quick. And and instead of, no, they're not going to sit down with an encyclopedia. They're going to go to Google. Now they're going to go to WhatsApp. They're going to go to, the AI or whatever. And so we have that technology, and it's inevitable that we're not going to use it. Of course it's going to be used. It is, okay? But my concern, and maybe yours, Richard, is that it can dumb people down if it's automatically done for them. And if they don't have to use certain parts of their brain, parts of their intuition, parts of their cognitive abilities to know how to seek, how to hunger for wisdom, to have a holy longing to understand the cosmos and the world and people and animals and why stuff happens and blah, 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 blah. If people don't have, like the caterpillar, a sense of a struggle inside of the cocoon to find its way to develop and break out and build strong wings, I think there's going to be a failure to launch. There's going to be a failure to be able to rise to higher heights that they're wanting to go to. Don't get me wrong. A lot of these young people are fantastic. I love them. I just adore them, and a lot of them, they'll go out and they'll go to the festivals. Like I used to go to the rock and roll shows to see Led Zeppelin, and probably our families and the world thought the same about us. But they'll go to the festivals and they're dancing to the music, but the music is no longer live. It's all digital. And, and then, and then there's a lot of the cacao and the plant medicines and things like that. And of course, during the 60s, yes, I did psychedelics and all those kinds of things too. So they're just that generation, they're going to need to figure it out themselves. But one of the things I learned is that I didn't need a lot of cacao or plant medicine, that all I needed was the breath and my open heart and the music, and that I could go anywhere in the cosmos I wanted to go to with shamanic breath work. And I have had people who've come in that I've been able to give them that experience. And they go, oh my God, this is just as good as cacao or plant medicine. And I'm like, and you know what? When you slow the breathing down and come back and we talk about it, you can go get in your car and drive home. Okay? Things like that. So I'm not a fuddy-duddy. I'm not against it. I'm proud of those young people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s going out and getting together and celebrating and peace, love, and all of that, all those kind of things. But I do have concerns about people being dumbed down. I really do. And not even, I don't know if there's sinister forces that are doing that, behind the scenes, like Dr. Strangelove. I don't know, I have my own phobias and paranoias to work through. But whether it's intentional or not, it's certainly true. When I talk to people sometimes, and I'm sharing these medicine stories that I used to hang on every word with those people so I could get the transmission, and I see them kind of looking off, I want to go, like, like the masters would walk around when I can't remember what tradition, but they would walk and they would have a ruler and slap them on the back, if they didn't sit and meditate in a certain way for 3 hours. I don't think that should happen to anybody. I think that's abusive, but I do have concerns. So that's my answer. Yes, Richard, I have concerns about that. And I pray and I hope that, like many of the people, younger people who are coming, then I'm able to share with them to hurry up and slow down. To hurry up and slow down. And I send people out on medicine walks. I'll say, don't come back. I send them out the way Grandma sent me. Don't come back until you've had a personal conversation with an insect and that it's downloaded its wisdom to you. When that has happened, then you write it down. Do not record it. Write it down and then come read it to me and share that story. And they're like, wow, and I'm like, wow.
That's great. Well, that's wonderful. And that leads us very naturally into the next question I'm going to ask you. Could you talk a little bit more about shamanic breath work? I mean, there's Stan Groff's holotropic breath work and various other antecedents. You're obviously familiar with those. Uh, Tell me specifically about shamanic breath work.
So I always believe in honoring my elders and honoring my lineages. So my first lineage is holotropic breath work. And my very first breath work, I was always a meditator, from the 60s. And sometimes I had some substances back then that helped me meditate. And I myself am in recovery, as I said before, for this year will be 43 years, March 21st. But I learned how very early on in my sobriety to meditate, to do yoga, to do guided imagery with Shakti Gawain, and the people who really started that movement. And so in my early sobriety, I went to a holotropic breath work. Had no idea what it was, but my AA sponsor took me. And we went to Nashville, Tennessee, which was about 3 hours from where I lived in Kentucky. And we went to a Red Roof Inn, and they had a conference room, and there was close to 300 people in that huge conference room, sitting on the floor in a big circle. I had no idea what I was getting into. And I thought we were just going to meditate or something. And it turned out it was holotropic breath work and the founders. And so I did that work. It was very profound. I had major rebirth and healing around stuff that had plagued me my whole life in that one session. And when I came out of the session, we got into small groups. I was just 20 something, and I looked out at the group, and they said, "What do you want to share? You've got a minute." And I just said, "I'm going to do this." And they said, "That's good, but what else do you want to share?" I said, "I'm going to do this." They said, "Is there anything else?" I said, "I'm going to do this." That's all I could say. I knew it's like things happen in your life. Like when I fall in love, usually the person that I met, I know immediately I'm going to fall in love with this person, whether it's a friend, a mate, a dog. It's like, you're mine. I know I'm going to fall in love with you. I knew I was going to fall in love, that I was in love with breath work, because as a counselor, ever since I was like 21, working in the psychiatric unit, working with the chronic mentally ill, I knew there had to be better ways to work with people for healing. I knew it, but I just didn't know what. Instead of drugging people up, setting them in a corner, hospitalizing them, people were doing the best they could for these folks, but I knew there was something more. So I began to really dive into breath work. And as I dove into it more, I became I can't tell the backstory, it's too long, but I was already acquainted with Jacqueline Small. And Jacqueline, I fell in love with her the minute I met her, like early 20s. And she was working with Stan at that time. She and Christina and Stan were all working together. And so I was doing work with that. But then there was, as often is, there was a parting of the ways. And Jacqueline went on to create Psychia Institute. And Psychia Institute is where I had to make a decision whether I was going to study holotropic or whether I was going to go with Jackie with integrative breath work. So in the beginning, they were together. So I had the good fortune of sitting with Ram Dass, just Marion Woodman, the greats that my bookshelves are filled with. Those are the people. Jeremiah Abrams with the shadow. Just all these amazing people would come because they would have a topic like the shadow or the beloved with Marion Woodman or whatever it might be. And then we would have all the teachings, and then we would do breath work to that, to receive the transmissions. So when Jacqueline and Stan and Christina all separated from one another, I chose to go with Jacqueline because she was a huge Theosophy, Rudolf Steiner's work, Annie Besant, all the different people, the mystics from way back, Paramahansa Yogananda, all the way to the present And she had so many people that respected her. They would come to the workshops, like Ram Dass, like Jeremiah, who came to teach about the shadow, like Marion Woodman, who came to teach about the beloved. They would come and have a segment, and then we got to sit with these people and then have breathwork experiences afterwards. So I felt like I had died and gone to heaven. I was, like I said, I was a little girl from Kentucky. And I'm in these world leaders, believers, and it changed my world. It rocked my world. And then we would do the breath work. And Jacqueline, with her breath work, Stan's was fabulous and it was very experiential. But Jacqueline really believed in going into doing in-depth art projects around your symbols like Carl Jung did. She was a huge devotee to Carl Jung's work. And so she immersed us in Jungian psychology and in the working with our shadow. She believed that all of the spiritual work you do, if you don't do the inner work of working with the shadow and the inner child, is really kind of insignificant if you don't digest it. And I as a therapist, lifelong therapist, I agree with that. So she really fit the bill for me with that. So during that time, I began to be introduced to shamans. And as that happened, that's what really caught my heart. People say, what are the two biggest things in your life? And I'm saying breath work. Well, three things. My sobriety, breath work, okay, and shamanism. Those things came together for me. So with that, there's so much, I have to just keep coming back to it, but the Native American path deeply touched something inside of me, and I now believe that what it was touching inside of me is my own lineage back to Scotland and Ireland, where my families came from. Because it's very, in many ways, the shamanism is very similar. So I don't know if I answered what you asked me. Once I start going in a certain place, like, okay, do I go down that road or the next road? But anyway, redirect me if there's someplace else you want to go.
No, that's a very comprehensive answer. One common theme in shamanism is, although people use different terms, power animals or spirit animal guides. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about this aspect of shamanism.
Well, I'm a big animal lover anyway, and I grew up on the farm with my grandparents. While my young parents went out to work every day. And they raised all their food, and they raised all our vegetables. My grandmother canned, we had chickens, all those kind of things. So I went barefoot from the time school let out until the time school started again. So people talk about earthing now and going out inside, and I just like call it going barefoot, and my feet were like I could walk on glass at the end of the year. It was wonderful. And I loved all my animals, rabbits and chickens and everything that we had there, and the mule that pulled the plow, and the dogs and the cats and the birds and the snakes and all the creatures. So I was a huge lover of nature, and that influenced me, really deeply. And my grandmother, who was Mammy Jones, but her maiden name was Poole, her family had come over, and my grandfather, who worked in the coal mines, his family had come over. They'd all come over from Europe, European countries. And so I didn't really know that or pay attention to that as a child. That didn't make any difference to me. But for me now, it means they were very close to the earth. They were very tribal themselves. And my grandmother sang ballads all the time, and things like that, and usually about lovers who loved each other and somebody killed somebody, and and all these kind of things. And I was an only grandchild for a long time. And so while my young parents, my dad had come back from the war, and my mom and dad would go off to work every day, just right down the street, or wasn't even a street, it was a dirt road they lived, that they would take me over, or I would even just stay with my grandparents a lot. So the first thing we did every day was go out into nature. We got up, we had breakfast. Well, wait, I would go down and get the eggs, come back. Then we would have breakfast. And then I was in nature. And then my grandfather was either preparing the garden, which I went behind him in the mill. He let me, I love to do that. Like I was actually being pulled, doing the mill myself, but he was right there, you know. And so, and he would always buy me a little rake and a shovel so that I could plant my own little garden, things like that. So I was learning how to plant and then getting all excited when I had a squash or a tomato, and then going and picking the grapes off the grapevine and the fruit from the trees and climbing in the trees and all these things. There was a way in which, as an only child and only grandchild for several years, I was immersed in my grandparents' very earth connected existence while my dad went to be a state policeman and my mom went to work in a department store office. And my parents are trying to live a modern life, but my grandparents are very steeped in this other life. So I loved being with my grandparents and being with all my creatures and animals. So there was a little book that I read, I think in grade school, called Heidi, and she goes up to be with her grandfather in the mountains. And that's what I felt like. And it was a very happy time, and I never wanted to go to school, but I did. And I did okay, but I always felt a little different, maybe being an only child and that sort of thing. But being in that nature and listening to my grandmother while my grandfather would do the plow and she would be putting the seeds behind him, sprinkle them into the earth, and I would be with her with my little apron doing that. She was praying to the earth to grow our food and thanking it. She didn't say Mother Earth. She just said, thank you, and I knew she was talking to the earth. And then, when it was done and it was covered back over and everything, we would set out under the night sky at night in the swing. And my grandmother would pray to Jesus and the spirits and the fairies all at the same time. And then she'd say, see that star up there? You watch it. It'll move in a little while. And in my imagination, at least, it did. And to this day, I swear it would move. And she'd say, ask them for help. So she was talking to the aliens. She completely believed in the aliens. And, my mother would say to me, now, Linda Kay, your mammy has a very overactive imagination. And then later on, as I started growing up, they said that to me. You have an overactive imagination. I'm so grateful that I inherited my overactive imagination from my Mammy Jones. And I give her the credit, and my Pappy Jones too, but especially her. I give her the credit for introducing me to the shamanic world before I heard the word shaman, so that as I grew older, I knew what to look for. She passed when I was 12, the last day of the year, December 31st, when I was 12 years old. And it left a huge gaping hole in my life for a long, long time. And the year after she passed, at 13, I started doing drugs and alcohol. So that was my substitute for an altered state, because with her went my dealer of altered states was my grandmother, in a good way. And so I had to find it in another way until I could realize it was inside me as well. So this connection to the shamanic world was always there for me before I knew what the word shaman was. So the first time I heard the word shaman, it intrigued me. And immediately when I read about it, I knew that that's what my grandparents were, that they were calling on forces to help them, the elemental world. They were calling on spirit guides and helpers. They were calling on deities, and that they were working close with the earth and having a relationship with the earth that was interactive and respectful and loving. And to me, that's what shamanism at its heart is. I have my rattle and my drum and my feathers, but that doesn't make you a shaman. What makes you a shaman is your heartfelt connection to the elemental world and your deep respect for everything and the interconnection to everything. And in that interconnection, there's a way in which you begin to heal, meaning me, and you can pass that healing on to others.
let me bring your attention to something that you mentioned just now and alluded to a little bit earlier, because you did say they do things different in other galaxies. And you also do mention the aliens. So, in the kind of shamanism that you know and practice, what kind of impressions, shall we say, do you have of these beings, that maybe up in the sky or maybe galaxies away?
Well, I think that we have spirit guides and helpers in all realms and all dimensions. And, as a child, I think most children know that. They have their imaginary playmates, and it could be a giant rabbit, or it could be a person, or, and they'll describe them, they'll draw them, all those kind of things. If you ask a child to close their eyes and then to see their imaginary playmate and then to draw it, I've worked with children. I've never had one not draw what they're seeing or attempt to. So, and of course, a lot of the work that you guys do, really, tries to protect, that energy of childhood, where that to keep that going for as long as is possible, that we're so close to the other world when we're born for those first few years. The veils are open, and the crown isn't fully closed yet. So there's a way in which there's this a natural relationship to the other worlds and to the other forms of life forms, if you want to call them, throughout the cosmos and interdimensionally. But here on this earth, as the crown begins to close more, I think that that's intentional, so that we can begin to relate to the earth beings and elementals and, like rocks. They're aliens themselves, in some way. And they're all these life forces. One of the first things that Grandmother Twyla, my Seneca Wolf Clan grandmother, did was said to me, go find a rock person. And so, some people could think that's an alien, right? Of a kind. And I went out on the reservation and went out and walked all day and until I found my rock person. And then she had me set out all night long in my little fire, by the little fire out back by myself, and wait for that rock person to talk to me and tell me and give me, if it would, its wisdom, and to do ceremony with it, to make offerings to it and all those kinds of things, so that it became a part of my medicine. And you ask that elder for wisdom. So this multidimensional world doesn't just start in outer space. It's on the earth with insects. My God, I wrote a book some years ago about the insect healers and teachers and their medicine. When we learn the frequencies that we can't even hear that they make, and the ones that they do, and how they communicate. And, look at how a caterpillar changes itself into this creature that can only crawl a couple of inches to a creature that can fly from the United States to Australia. And get there before a jet does. It's like, talk about aliens, talk about, I'm not going to call them aliens, but these supernatural, if you will, supernature creatures. That's what supernatural means. And that it exists in all realms. So why would it only be beneath the earth, on the earth, or just in the sphere of this planet? It would make no sense whatsoever for this to only be, we're so special that this would be the only place that there's anything alive anywhere in all the cosmos and throughout it. Talk about egocentric, And maybe it's because it feels a little too scary or a little overwhelming for people to imagine what's beyond here. But I get excited about it personally. And because of that, and because I've been that weird kid who talked to aliens as a child, who believed in the star that Mammy taught me about, that if I stood and watched it long enough, or slept with my head on the pillow and looked at it long enough, that it would move and that I could talk to it, and that there was energy there, the star itself, and that whatever energy forms were there, and that I could tell it when I was sad or scared or didn't have an answer, or, and if I was in trouble with my mom or dad or whatever, and that it was an ancestor that it was a grandmother, that it was a grandfather that loved me, that would comfort me, that would hold me, that would give me a message, that would help me understand what I did wrong or whatever. And so for me, the star people were always there for me. And they still are, quite frankly. You know, people say, how do you write these books? Where do they come from for you? And I'm like, some comes from my experience as a human, as a child, from my family of origin. Some comes from my dreams. Some comes from my experiences in the world, what I've learned. Some comes from the people that I have sat at their feet and received. And a good portion of it has come from my psyche that is multidimensional and that is open to receiving what I call downloads from the energies of the cosmos, from these interdimensional beings. So, you know, I feel like aliens is such a strange thing to call them. It's just alien to us, you know. I think interdimensional beings, beings in time, space, and in other dimensions, other worlds throughout the cosmos. And, you know, there is no time or space between prayer from the moment you imagine it, utter it, and where it lands to where it's going. You know, I mean, think about it. You can go on and you could send me an email right now to have it like in a second. Prayer is so much more powerful than that. And imagine that when we're praying or when we're asking for help or calling for a vision, and maybe we know specifically that we're, you know, calling to Sirius, you know, the dog star. I call it, Grandma Twile, I call it the wolf star, the wolf, where the wolf clan came from, you know, and calling from the wolf clan ancestors, those who've come before, those who maybe have not even been here to this earth, but sent emissaries here, like Zechariah Sitchin spoke about in his work. You know, there's, what is it? Oh, there's so much, Horatio. You know, there's so much that's known and unknown. And it would be arrogant of us to think that this egocentric, we're just humans and we're the rulers of the world and the cosmos, you know, and nothing exists until we get there. No life forms, you know, all those kind of things. And, you know, I think there's a part of us that gets scared that they think that there's something bigger, you know, that it might control us or hurt us or whatever. And what I feel is like, I think if they really wanted to do that, they could have done it a long time ago. We're pretty much a moving target, you know. But at this moment, either we just have dumb luck and they don't know we're here, or there's a benevolence in the cosmos, which is what I tend to believe, is that not that everybody's perfect or that there's not warring civilizations and like ours, you know. But I have a faith in the goodness of the universe or the multiverse. You know, to me, the word goodness is just another way to say God or goddess, goodness.
Maybe you could conclude by telling us one notable healing experience that comes to your mind now, either happened to yourself or to someone else that you've been working with.
There are so many, Richard. I think, you know what? I think I'm going to go back to the day that I got sober. That's such a long time ago, almost 43 years. But it was the place where I began to believe in miracles again. Because as a child, I absolutely believed in the miraculous. But after my grandmother passed and I felt so lost without her, and it was in 1962, and as I say, all heaven and hell broke loose during that time. There was a part of me that was a broken-hearted little girl, because she was the one that held me to this planet and to my own soul. And so that's when I started using substances outside of me to take care of my nervous system and my emotions and to not feel the pain. I was self-medicating. And it was readily available in the 60s at 12 and 13 years old. And so I think that I was full blown addicted and didn't know it in those early teen years. And even though I managed to be on the honor roll and hide it from people and first of all, if you're hiding it, that's your first clue, but you don't know that at the time. And then going away to the University of Kentucky, and everybody, of course, was drinking and using psychedelics and doing all the things that people were doing. But I was the one who always got a little more intoxicated than a good portion of the rest of the people. Or I was the one who always did something really wild, just different things. And so when I hit my bottom, where I finally had to face that I couldn't stop, because I would say, I'm going to stop. I would even tell someone, I'm not going to do this. And by nighttime, I was doing it again. It was humiliating. I hid it really well for a long, long time till the very end. But the reason I'm sharing this is because I'm a very strong-willed person, Richard. And I was using my will as hard as I could. And I absolutely was unable to stop using alcohol. I had stopped now all other drugs, and I justified the alcohol. And I don't think there's anything wrong for people to have, social use of whatever. But I can't. That's not the way I'm made. If one is good, 10 is better. It's just, I'm a passionate person who gets excited about things, and I have to think about it before I do something. I really do. And I have to say, is this going to grow corn in my life, or is this an addictive process? I think that's why I'm a really good addictions counselor. I don't judge people for it. And at the same time, I also know the ups and downs, ins and outs, and I know the path to wholeness. But to answer your question now, I wanted to give you the background first, because why it is such a miracle is that I finally hit my bottom when I once again had consumed way too much alcohol. And I went into the bathroom, and I went to the holy throne that's in the bathroom, and on my knees in front of it, I got sick. And then I just laid there and wept. And I just was as low as you could go, hugging a toilet on the floor. And I was so ashamed, and I was embarrassed. There was nobody to be embarrassed with, but to know that this is where I was, and yet I would get up and go to work or go work with people who had issues and problems and stuff. And I felt like such a hypocrite. I felt like I wasn't being a good mother. I felt like I don't know if I was or wasn't, because I was during the day, I was fine. But emotionally, I had to be hungover. So I had tried already several times to curtail and only have one, only do this, all the games I played with myself. And finally, on this day, I just flat out said out loud to the God of my understanding, to my higher power, if you will take this away from me and remove this obsession from me, I promise you that from this day forward, my life belongs to you, 100%. Wherever you show me to go, I will go. Whatever you show me to do, I will do. I will not argue. I will not debate. I will not make excuses. I will not turn the other way. I will not back off from what I'm afraid of. I will do whatever you would have me do. And I cried for a few minutes, and then I stumbled off to bed. It was in the afternoon. I awakened about 3 hours later. Now you're talking about a person who had an obsessive, compulsive, biological, chemical, spiritual addiction, who used every day secretly as much as possible in the evenings. From that day that I was at that toilet till now, Like I said, just March 21st will be 43 years. I've never touched another substance of any kind except like chocolate. you know, they'll have to pull that one out of my hand as they're burying me. But anyway, and later on that evening, when I normally would have started drinking, I didn't even think about it. And it was like I had amnesia. And then all of a sudden I thought, I didn't go pour a drink. And then I thought, well, I'll pour one after a while. And I didn't, and I didn't, and I never did again. And it wasn't like an urge, and it wasn't like I was sweating or, it was like it had never been a problem, ever. And from that day forward till now, I'll get teary here. But my higher power and I have kept our commitment of fidelity to one another. I've been through some really hard things with loved ones who've died, some really hard disappointments, like many of us who've lived to this point. And I think I'm probably one of the happiest people I know, although I certainly feel my feelings, all of them. But I'm a very happy, joyous, grateful person. And there is nothing I would rather do than share this medicine with you and with others. Nothing. And I'm very
Great.
grateful.
That's great. Thank you. That's a beautiful account. Well, we've about come up to the end of our time. So, do you have anything you would like to add that we haven't discussed in the last hour?
Yes, I pulled a card for today's journey together, and grandmother Twyla taught the medicine. There's a deck of cards out called the medicine cards. And one of her proteges, Jamie Sams, who's now on the other side with grandmother Twyla, Jamie created that deck, the medicine card deck. But those were all of grandmother Twyla's teachings that she directly transmitted to Jamie. And so today I thought, oh, I'll see if Graham wants to be here with us and what she wants to bring. And it's considered to be the most powerful card in the deck, although all the animals are all sacred and they all have medicine. But this is considered, and that's why it's number one in the deck, to be the biggest guide in the deck because it's the highest flyer. And it was the eagle.
Fabulous.
And I thought, well, at some point, if it's appropriate, I'll share that. But it's the eagle, and the eagle is the one who can fly the highest. In our country here in the United States, it's the eagle, and of course in Peru it's the condor. But they are the highest flying creature is the eagle, and it can see, has tremendous sight to be able to see the bigger picture of why everything is happening, and to be able to have the wisdom to know right action. And the last thing is I just wanted to, if I could hold up my book, which is the Aquarian Shaman, and it's from Intertraditions Bear and Company, and they've published most of my books. They're such a fabulous, fabulous publishing company. And it says, Walking the Spiral Path of Transformation. And it's a foreword by my good friend Lee McCormick, who was a major shaker and mover, especially in the field of addiction and in Mexico and with the Teotihuacan and all the Toltec teachings. And he just passed a couple of months ago. So it's really touching to me that before he passed, he took the time to write the foreword for this book. So Lee's in here too. And the thing I most love about this book, Richard, is not so much about what I say in it, but I have all these wonderful, in the middle, I have all these wonderful photos of what I call, Aquarian shamans, whether it's my friend who's an actor, Brian DeLate, or whether it's, somebody who's a therapist, or whether it's a native elder like Jorge Delgado. It's a whole arrangement or array of people, younger to older, different nationalities, different paths, who are all maybe have different lineages, but who are all sharing the same kind of medicine with the world. And it's to encourage people to say, time to awaken your own shaman within, because it's the age of Aquarius, which says to me that this is the time for all of us to download those energies and bring our wisdom to the world.
That's great. Thank you so much. Well, in regard to the eagle, I'm willing to say that I think anyone who watches this video will finish it on a higher level of consciousness than when they start. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I know our viewers will be delighted with it. Have a good day.
Thank you, Richard.